Welcome to the Physician Wealth Med podcast. It's wealth medicine for doctors. If you're a doctor and you have no time, it looks like you found us just in time. This podcast is for all doctors who would like to work on their personal wealth, but do not have traditional hours to do so because they have no time. We're here to jump into topics that will help you address your wealth both inside and outside of your practice so that you can live the life of significance you're dreaming of. You'll hear from your peers, you'll hear from industry professionals, and your host and wealth advisor, me, Kevin Sullivan. This is your time. Now let's get started with today's podcast. Welcome to Physician Wealth Med podcast. We like to say it's wealth medicine for doctors, and we've got some incredible wealth medicine this morning. We have Don Connelly with us from Don Connelly Associates. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you again. This is podcast number 2 with Don. We did a few years ago, we did a podcast with Don, and I just wanted to have you as doctors and listeners to this podcast hear what he has to say. I've got a few things I wanted to tell you right up front. So, doctors, if you got a pen in your hand, just kind of put it down. Let me have your undivided attention here for just a second. There's so much that I could say about Don Connelly, so I've written down some points, Don. I just want to read them to the doctors so they can also see and hear what I'm about to say. He's had an expansive career of over 45 years, and he's been the keynote speaker with probably most every single firm on the planet, right? I mean, as far as you're traveling, he's sought out, and you get to the point in your career where you are sought out, and he's highly regarded in the investment community. Don is the master of putting markets and life into perspective with the insights, experience, and knowledge that he brings to the table. I started following Don's insights back in the late 90s, and I've followed him ever since. And he's made me a better wealth advisor. And I want you to really hear that. He has made not only me, but countless of thousands of other advisors a better advisor, 100%. And in my day-to-day interactions with clients, inevitably, I'll recall something that Don has said in the past that I can use at a moment's notice to put perspective for my clients. And that's priceless. And Don, the thing I appreciate most about you, I don't even know if I could rank them in order, but one of the biggest things that I remember that you've said over and over, time and time again, is keeping it simple, keeping the basics. Get back to basics. Never forget the basics, because human nature always brings you back to the basics. And when you're dealing with the basics, you can never go wrong because you're always doing the things that you need to do, and you don't get off on some tangent. You know, you can keep it where it needs to be for clients and relatable and understandable for the advice that we give to clients. So I think one of the things that been my success in the business is clients telling me that I make things understandable, and Don has a lot to do with that. So with that introduction, Don, welcome to this podcast.
Thank you, Kevin.
Again. It's such an honor to have you on here today. And I wanted to have him on here today to continue to talk about, some things that are pertinent to doctors as you go through life and you see the headlines on TV and the tariffs. And I thought Don would be an excellent choice to help put some of that in perspective. So I wanted to have Don talk about the headlines and things that distract investors. And really maybe this phrase, Don, is it always different this time? When you turn on the news, is it always different this time? Are we always in unprecedented times? So maybe if you could jump right into that.
Well, welcome to everybody, and thank you for having me on. Everything's different, Kevin. Nothing's changed. Mm-hmm. Every generation has an apocalypse. It might be now, it might be tariffs, it might be the election, whatever it is. 20 years ago, it was 9/11. And 20 years before 9/11, generational, it was, some of you will remember, if you're old enough to remember, high interest rates. Mortgage rates at 14%, CDs paying 17%. People know I love those 17% CDs. They forget the pain they went through to get there. 20 years prior to that, Kevin, it was John Kennedy. 20 years prior to that, it was World War II. 20 years prior to that, it was World War I and the Depression. So every generation has a 9/11 type event. That it just totally gets us off focus. I can sum up, I can end this podcast right now with one comment.
There you go.
I was a young stockbroker. Actually, 45 years is complimentary. It's more like 60 years.
Yeah,
I'm going to be 80 years old in a couple of months.
Yes, sir.
The day I was a young stockbroker at E.F. Hutton in Boston, I came back from training. I got my license. I sat down. My first day in production, Kevin, the Dow closed at 874. It's now at 42,000. And I've been worried every day since. I worry every day about the market. It's gone from 800 to 42,000 in my career. So enough said, right? That's
right. That's
keep your eye on your goals. Focus on the destination, not the journey. I think.
And thank you for joining our podcast today. This has been Don Connelly. I'm just, hey, there's a lot of truth. You might need to say that again. Just do that comment again.
Well, the day I got licensed as a young stockbroker, back in the days we was called stockbrokers. And I was a young kid in Boston, 22, probably years old at the time. And I'm all set and ready. The Dow closed at 874. And today it's at 42,000.
Amazing.
And I've been worried every single day. My clients have been worried. We're all worried every day. But, Alan Abelson, who passed away a couple of years ago, wrote a column in Barron's called Up and Down Wall Street. And he had an analogy one day that was so true and so timeless. He said, imagine a person walking up a hill with a yo-yo, playing with a yo-yo, and not watching the hill. The person's going to see the up and downs of the yo-yo and not realize he or she's gaining ground. Are you gaining ground? I don't know. Why? Because I'm not watching. I'm watching the yo-yo. Well, get your eye off the yo-yo, get it back on the hill. The yo-yo is the headlines. The hill is the market. If you don't watch the long, the trend is your friend, is the old cliche. The trend is up. The day I turned 60, the Dow was 10,000. The trend is up. And it just keeps going up. But if you get so close to it, you can't see it. You're caught up in the day-to-day craziness. So the moral is don't listen to the short-term noise. Focus on your goals. Your job as an advisor, I don't want to tell you your job, but I don't think you manage money as much as you manage behavior.
Yes.
It's your responsibility to help your clients set their goals and hold them accountable till those goals are achieved. And it's hard to stay in your lane. It's very difficult. Yeah. And so the one way to do that, it's like being seasick. You don't look at the water, you look at the horizon. Focus on your goals. Everything else is white noise, I assure you.
Absolutely.
Everything. There'll be a 9/11 in 20 years. Trump will be gone. There'll be somebody there, and it'll be the same thing. It'll be different, but it'll be the same thing all over again.
That's right. Yeah. I know one thing that I find in working with physicians and doctors is that they don't have a lot of time, to do what they need to do. And so sometimes when you have lack of time, you make irrational decisions because you're just trying to get something done to move the needle. But what would you say to doctors that are just so super busy working in the practice, they can't lift their head up to maybe work on their personal wealth in the way that they should?
Well, a couple of comments. My brother-in-law is a retina specialist. He literally, when he's not doing surgery, sees as many as 50, 60, 70 patients a day. He has no time. He spent his time in the beginning finding an advisor he likes and trusts. So he's hitched his wagon to this advisor. They've got now probably a 30-year relationship. But he doesn't worry day to day, trusts his advisor. So I think what somebody has to do is I think people looking for an advisor are not looking for information. Doctors aren't necessarily looking for information. It's the same when a person goes to a doctor. Not looking for information, looking for someone they can trust. I've had surgery, I've had AFib, and I've had ablations, and I've gone through all. I have to trust the doctor. It's the same in our business. If you have an advisor, if you don't like him, you don't like her, get a different advisor. But three things have to happen to hire an advisor. You have to like the advisor, trust the advisor, and think the advisor is smart, providing good solutions. My brother-in-law has that comfort. He trusts his advisor. And they become great friends over the years, and their kids grew up together, and it's a great relationship. Other people have bad relationships, they get burned, it's time to move on. But as a doctor, you can't have it's like having two jobs. You can't do that. And you can't run it yourself. For God's sakes, you can't run your own money. I tell people I'm 79 years old, soon to be 80. I've had my hair cut once a month for 79 years. I don't know how many haircuts. That's a lot of haircuts. Kevin, when the guy's cutting my hair, I look in the mirror and I watch him cut my hair.
Yeah.
So I've watched my hair being cut 12 times a year for 79 years. I still can't cut my own hair.
That's a
I
good
don't think
point.
people watching a financial advisor can run their own account just because they watched a financial advisor and they've got access to the same information. They've got the internet and the television and, well, I've got all the information. It's not knowledge.
Right.
Get an advisor you can trust, a behavioral coach.
Right.
It'll hold you accountable.
Right. I know I've heard it say, information leads to knowledge, but then wisdom is what you do with all that knowledge after the fact.
Someone told me knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad.
Now that's what I like right there. See, this is what you're missing, doctors. This is stuff we've heard for decades. It's so great to hear this because it puts things in perspective. And that's the whole point. I remember you were talking one time about if you want to get from point A to point B, you could walk and it'd take you the longest time to get there. You could drive, but you want to select the appropriate vehicle to go from Maine to California. You'll get there faster if you fly.
Cool. The analogy I use is you say you're in New York City, you're driving to Miami, you're driving anywhere. And you're stuck in New York City traffic, God forbid, and a kid on a bicycle messenger goes zipping by. You're not going to sell your car and buy a bicycle and continue to Miami on a bicycle just because he beat you for a block or two in short-term traffic.
Right.
So you stick with the plan. That's the hardest part, is having a plan and sticking to it.
No, that's it. Because I know a lot of doctors, once they do start to pay attention and get a little bit more proactive with their wealth, great things happen. And that's just the part of being proactive with what you're doing versus reactive.
Well, you get rich slowly.
Yeah.
I'll use my brother-in-law, my doctor brother-in-law as an example. Every time he's gotten burned, Kevin, he got out of his lane. Someone talking about buying land in Florida or doing this or doing that. And he gets into something he doesn't understand and gets burned.
Right.
And stick to your knitting, right? As my generation would say, stick to your knitting.
Here's a question that I didn't put out to you before the podcast, but I'm thinking of it as we're talking. You're 79, turning 80, and you still love what you do. Do you have any advice or thoughts about doctors that have already transitioned maybe into retirement, but yet what does that lifestyle look like for them and how they can stay active, maybe in what they're doing? But just because they love it, I'm sure it's a passion of what they're doing. But what does retirement look like on the other side of where you once were?
Well, I'm not a candidate for retirement. I'm going to retire. You're not going to drag me out with my boots on. But
that's it.
The reality is we don't retire from, Kevin. We retire to.
Yeah.
Too many people over the years have retired and slammed the brakes on and died. I mean, Joe Paterno and Lyndon Johnson and Bear Bryant, and the list is endless. So I think one thing is find something we love to do and continue to do it. My cardiologist is now getting older. He's built a good practice over the years. He is now not seeing patients anymore. He's still the chief cardiologist at the local hospital. He's still running his own practice, running the business. He's not seeing patients. He's cutting back. And so I think the idea is to taper off, cut back, and do something else. I got a friend. I live in Sarasota, Florida. I've got a friend here who was a builder in Pennsylvania, built condominiums in the Pocono Mountains for years. He's an amateur pilot. So now that he's retired, Kevin, once or twice a week or whenever he gets hired, he'll fly fishermen down to the Keys, fly them somewhere to fish. Keeps his hand in the game. We can't, if you retire, we cannot sit on the couch. And doctors are pretty active people. I admire doctors for the lifestyle. They're trim, they're fit, they're in good shape. But just stay active. I walk 5 miles a day, rain or shine. It's the best thing I can do for me. I've got some issues. I got some old man issues. But I still walk every single day. And so retirement to me is doing something you love, whether it's teaching at night school or writing a book or gardening I tell doctors, I think a lot of doctors, I talked to a doctor friend of mine recently who is a great golfer. He loves golf. He was going to retire and manage his own account, pull it from his advisor, run his own money and play golf. I said, do you realize if you manage your own money, you'll never get good at golf? You aware of that?
Right. Yeah.
So forget the managing money. You don't need that stress. If you like to travel, you can't manage your own money and travel. You've got to have that relationship and find something you love, focus on it, and just retirement's not an objective for everybody. Retire to, not from.
Yeah, I like that because golf takes repetition, focus, and you got to spend some time there. So does managing money. But I know one of the things that I talk a lot about is knowing where you stand. Nobody in this day and age should ever have to wonder in knowing where they stand for their financial goals, no matter where they are, because of all the tools and technology and ways that we can communicate with people. Talk about the importance of maybe knowing where you stand so you have a baseline or a foundation to build off moving into life.
Well, you got to know you got to have a plan, first of all. It's like going to a mall and you want to get to the shoe store. You go to a mall map. You're here. You want to get there. This is how you do it. That's financial planning. Where are you now? Where are you going? How are you going to get there? But you got to stay on the plan. I don't mean to frighten anybody, but if somebody's 45 years old and gets paid once a month and wants to retire at age 65, they've only got 240 paychecks left in their lifetime. A 50-year-old has 180 paychecks left. You're not going to save a lot, 180 paychecks. So have a plan. You know, they always say it's cliche, but it's true. You can save and spend, or you can spend and save. The people that spend and save work for the people that save and spend.
That's it. Yes.
You got to stay. Just make sure you don't need to look at the numbers. Let the advisor worry about the numbers. Where are you on your plan?
Yeah.
You know, I find most people just want peace of mind. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
We want to educate our kids. We want to pay our taxes. We want to retire. We're not interested in ETFs or SMAs or managed money or yield to maturity or downside capture. That's not our thing. When I sit with my doctor, say before an ablation, I recently had an amulet put in. I listened to the doctor and I had to make a decision. Do I trust this doctor? And I'm going to stick with it. He's got a plan. And he said to me, I've done this 5,000 times. And I said, good for me. Good enough for me.
Yes.
So I trust him. So it's getting a plan, trusting the plan, checking in periodically. I don't know how often you do client reviews, probably 3 or 4 times a year.
Oh, absolutely.
And just make sure you're on the plan.
Yeah.
Don't worry about stock A or stock B or this price or that price. Don't worry about your overall net worth in the plan.
I remember getting into the business when I was 23 years old. Who listens to a young kid at 23, right? Had to fight that battle. But then as I started a couple years in, I've seen your life over and over through the eyes of my clients. And now 36 years later, it might be new for someone that's transitioning into retirement or the sustainability of retirement. But now we've seen it thousands of times over the past 36 years. Your life played out in front of us through the eyes of our clients. So it might be new for the doctor going through it for the first time, but yet we've seen it like 1,000 times over in the last 36 years. And just like with them in their medical profession, they've done that surgery, like you said, 5,000 times. And that's the answer that you want to hear for sure. Not someone that said, oop, I just started this last year.
Let's stick with golf for a minute. Let's talk about cataract surgery. So you're going to get cataract surgery. You've got the cattle shooters, they call them, the big companies that do, the guy did my eyes, did 100,000. He did 100,000 procedures himself.
Wow.
Or you got the specialists that do less. And the specialists will say, well, you don't want to get caught up in the cattle shoot. But I would say to you, well, let's look at it from both points of view. Let's say we have 2 golfers of equal ability. One plays 36 holes a day. One plays 9 holes a week. Who are you going to bet on? So you want that repetition. Someone has done it before. And I don't think being young, by the way, is a handicap. Because the young doctors are the most highly trained, tip of the spear. And when I was a kid, people say I was 22, I think. People say, you're awfully young. I say, yeah, but I'm working every day and getting older. I'm working hard and getting older.
That's it.
But the highest paid people in America are young, Kevin. They're athletes, they're entertainers, the LeBron Jameses of the world. They're fabulously wealthy people, and they're young. So talent's ageless. A talented doctor is ageless.
That's good. No, that's a great perspective in that. Absolutely. What other things that would you like to cover today? I'm just going to give you the open mic here today.
How much time do we have? You asked me about tariffs. We talked about tariffs on the phone.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
I'll make one comment about tariffs. Don't worry about them. Unless you're invested in stocks, agriculture, whatever, that they're going to be affected by tariffs. But tariffs represent 0.3 to 0.4% of our economy typically. It would be 80, 90 billion, whatever is a year. It's unusual for them to get over 1%. But the analogy I use with tariffs is imagine you're standing on a dock at a big lake and you throw a couple of rocks in the water. It's going to cause some ripples. It's not going to raise the level of, it's not going to disrupt the lake by any means. So again, tariffs is just one more thing to worry about. Don't worry about tariffs. Worry about staying healthy and focusing on your goals. I will make that comment. I have a new passion. I don't want to get carried away on a sidetrack, but healthcare. I just came off 3 years as a caregiver. My wife's dad died at age 96. He had 95 great years, 1 miserable year. We were caretakers for 3 years. I had no idea of the financial toll, the emotional toll. So I began to focus, like I get pregnant women, sees other pregnant women, right? I want to buy a black Escalade, you see black Escalades. Well, now that I was a caregiver, I see other caregivers. Right. I had friends give up their careers to take care of their parents. The emotional toll on a family is enormous. Even if you can afford help to come in, it's the planning of meals. It's very time consuming. So I said to him that I found out nothing can disrupt a financial plan more devastating or faster than an unexpected long-term care event. Now, statistically, Kevin, of all Americans over 65 years or older, 7 out of 10 are going to have an event. So where are you going to put yourself, Kevin? With the 7 or the 3?
That's it.
Probably the 7, right? You're going to have an event. Now, it just gets crazy. Today, it's $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month. So where does long-term care policies come into play? I don't care how wealthy you are. I don't care how much money you make. If I say to you, Kevin, all of a sudden you got an expensive $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month, that's going to bite.
Yeah.
So my new thing, my new crusade, about 11% of Americans own long-term care policies. Buy one, get one. I think people under $100,000 in investable assets depend on Medicaid. Maybe if you get over $3 million in investable assets, you can self-fund your own care.
Yeah.
But in between 100,000 and 3 million, there are 130 million Americans that are vulnerable to this onslaught of expenses and emotional toll. I've hooked up with an insurance/technology company that they've taken all the 3 biggest problems with long-term care. One is most people get rejected. Not most, 40% get rejected. That doesn't make a lot of people happy.
Right.
Secondly, there's an elimination period between the time you file and the time you get paid. And thirdly, the receipts turn you into a bookkeeper. I saw my wife become a bookkeeper with John Hancock, taking care of her. We've been taking care of her dad, who just passed away. So these guys created a long-term care policy where there's everyone gets qualified, everyone gets insurance. Depending on your health, depends how much you get. I'm not sure you get long-term care premiums.
Right.
If you put $100,000 in an annuity, there's $100,000 right there for care. If it becomes an annuity and you keep it for wealth generation transfer down the road. But that's so you can get as high as 3 times the amount you put in the annuity. That's important. There is no elimination period. As soon as the claim is approved, people get paid. There are no receipts.
Nice.
So it's taken all the angst out of long-term care.
Yeah.
And I'm involved with them.
On the day that you need to use it, the last thing you want to do is just figure out how it works and read the fine print and where's the phone number and what kind of receipts or reimbursement that I have to.
You can't send in fee. You got to scan receipts, not send receipts in. It just never ends. It never ends.
Right.
My father-in-law wanted in his last few days, he wanted somebody there. We had a nurse come in, actually a certified nurse's assistant, CNA. And he wanted someone there when he woke up during the night. He could afford it. So he said, I'd like someone here at night when I wake up, help me get into the bathroom, whatever. Kevin, in Sarasota, it's $38 an hour for a CNA. If you price that out at 24 hours a day, that's $330,000 a year, hard cash out the door.
Man.
That wrecks plans.
It does.
There were 3 ways you could buy long-term care. I like the chassis, and what I'm talking about is an indexed annuity, indexed to the market. So I love it. You can do life insurance, you can do annuities, you can straight out buy a policy. Yeah. But everybody listening, and if you've got patients who are caregivers, tell them they got to buy it for themselves so it doesn't become a burden to their children. Yeah. So I'll stop ranting. No.
There's a phrase that says you can be certain that something uncertain is going to happen to you in retirement. It's a certain thing that you have to go through. If nothing else, you're a caregiver for your own parents at some point in the future. That's true of long-term disability, which I'm sure you have for your clients. Yeah. Say to somebody, make the math easy. Somebody earns $100,000 a year. They're 40 years old, want to retire at age 65. They're going to earn $2.5 million in the next 25 years. That's their earnings. They're a machine cranking out $2.5 million. What do you do if the machine breaks? Yeah. That's disability income. All those things are building guardrails around the plans that you build. Life insurance, long-term care, disability income. Those things are really critical. It's, and again, I don't want to pontificate, but financial planning is many, many prongs. Most financial advisors, Kevin, stop at retirement planning. Don't talk about risk, state wealth transfer, all of these other things. The risk of a stroke, of a heart attack, of disability, of whatever. That's all part of financial planning. It's not just retirement planning. Yeah. And whose checkbook do you want to have the check written to, or what account do you
I don't care how
want?
wealthy you are, it's going to
Yeah,
bite.
it's going to bite. That's right. So you could either retain the risk, you could transfer the risk, or share the risk. That is so important. We had Dr. Tom Davis on a podcast just not too long ago, a few months back, that talked about disability income for the doctors. And he's a direct recipient of why that was so important. So he said in the podcast, he says, run, don't walk, stop what you're doing right now and forego your lunch even to check into it. Because he goes, I was super healthy. He was like 46 at the time or so when everything started to happen. So
I've got a friend who's a surgeon. He can't operate anymore.
Yeah.
He's hurt his hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are great points from Don, how to make the money, how to stay the course, and how to retain the money. It's so important. If you're thinking about generational wealth, it could all stop at a moment's notice if you have a long-term care event. It could really put a monkey wrench into what you're doing. So these are very important topics. Don, I want to thank you for that today.
I wish we had more time. Thank you, Kevin.
We could go all day. Don, he's just a wealth of knowledge, wealth of perspective. And I hope you can see that and hear that in his voice and his passion and what he does. He's been a tremendous resource to me and thousands of other advisors across this great country over the years. And Don, I wish you well. I want to thank you again. I'd love to have you back on another podcast.
Maybe we'd love to do it anytime.
Yeah, let's say we could even do it solely on long-term care and just jump into it, because the whole podcast thought process is to let you listen to this at your own time when you have the time. So put the podcast on, share it with your colleagues and friends. And
if we do that, Kevin, I'll bring in someone who's really an expert. I'm not an expert in long-term care, but someone who's a high-level executive with a great perspective.
That'd be perfect. Yeah. And that's the kind of content that we do want to deliver to our doctors. So thank you again, Don. I hope you have a wonderful day, my friend. And
always a pleasure to see you, Kevin.
Thank you so much. And we'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. That's our podcast for today. And remember, if you're not working on your personal wealth, who is? Please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues, and make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Any questions about what you heard today, please send an email to kdsullivan@lpl.com. Physician Wealth Meds, wealth medicine for doctors.